You are loved. You are enough. Everything is going to be okay. You belong here. You are called. I call these 5 statements grace statements. That's how I refer to them. They've come to me over the years in meditation and in other spaces, drawing from inspiration all over. And I've sat with these statements a lot, and for me, if I were to sort of frame them in a Unitarian Universalist context, I would say that this is sort of the good news of our first principle, right? That we promote and affirm, respect the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, all persons. And this is part of that, is understanding that these statements apply for all of us, all the time, without fail. So today I'm going to focus on one of them, which is you are called, which I love. I was asked to preach on this, so preach on call. And for some people, they're not familiar with what this concept is of call, what it means to be called to do something. And I guess I'm here to say that it's not just one thing. So we'll explore a couple areas of what this might mean to be called, but I think the kind of primary one that people think of has to do with purpose. Being called into something specific, to do something. And for some people, this is sort of the proverbial knock at the door from God, right? What is mine to do in the placement of all of it? And for some, it's not just a proverbial knock at the door from God, it's the proverbial knock at the door from God. This is what they do, right? I think maybe just a slightly more accessible question for folks who aren't using this vocabulary typically is just, what is mine to do? Just think of it in terms of that question of what is mine to do? And like I said, sometimes that's a purpose of what's mine to do. But sometimes we can think of it also as being a placement. Maybe what is yours to do is to just be right where you are, right at this moment. So I'm going to, again, invite this congregation into more of an interactive type of service, similar to the one we had in December, where I'll invite you all to speak with one another about some ideas or questions, which I will prompt you about. And to do this, I'll provide a couple avenues of exploration and a few anecdotal stories, teaching, stuff like that. And then, like I said, I'll invite you all to speak with one another. And I also want to just invite to have this interactive time to let it be a dance. That's why we sung the song. Don't think of it so much as, I'm going to have to say something concrete and be committed for the rest of my life, and this is it. This is the call. I said it. Oh, no. Play with it. These things are evolving, just like John was talking about. So the first story or avenue I'll tell, this comes from my own life. I was at a spiritual retreat, and I had been placed into a small group, and we had met in a very, kind of strong container, and that container was let go, and then we were just going out to lunch, and I was standing next to another man, and almost in an offhanded way, he began to tell me a story about how he had suffered sexual abuse as a child at the hands of his brother. His older brother. And I was shocked to be receiving this story. I mean, nothing had prompted it. There wasn't any reason that he would just start telling me this. But he felt safe. And as I was watching him tell the story, I could see the relief washing over his face as he was unburdening himself of this secret that he had kept for so long. And after the conversation wound around a little bit more, he told me that I was the fourth person that he had ever told that story to. That he had told a therapist, he had told his wife, and he had told one other friend who he felt comfortable telling. And for some reason, when he said that to me, something just clicked within me, where I realized that I have been sort of holding this safe space, I'll call it, my whole life. You know, when I was a kid, I was the type of friend that everyone told their secrets to. I don't know why, but that's sort of how it was. Certainly as a lawyer, if you get that kind of access often, where people will tell you the things they don't or won't tell anyone else. But it was deeper than that for me. It locked something into place of understanding about my place in all of this, my purpose, what my call is, which I now articulate as creating and facilitating safe spaces and safe passages. And I like to think I'm doing that right here and right now in this space. I'm especially tickled by the telling of Jerome this morning for the Time for All Ages. That's a story that I grew up with. And, kind of funny was after I got back from the spiritual experience, there was a lot going on there. And I ended up, this thing where this man communicated with me. And I started doing an inventory of my childhood and the stories I grew up on, and just kind of looking back at that with fresh adult eyes. I don't know if y'all have done that before. It can be very strange to look back at the stories you imbibed as a child and go, oh, okay, I guess I was reading that. But I went back to Jerome, which is probably my family's favorite children's story. And I basically realized that I had grown into Jerome. That I had imbibed that story so deeply. There was so much resonance with me around this idea of creating safe spaces. And then I thought about what Jerome did in each of those circumstances where he would just meet with this offending individual, listen to them, see what was going on with them, be present to them, and help them. And often they ended up helping themselves in that moment. So I guess here I am, I'm your frog here to do ministerial deeds, So I'm going to invite you all now to speak with one another. And I would ask you to share a story or tell a little bit. We won't have too much time here, maybe just 30 seconds or a minute for each person to share. But what is it in your own story that you have just always done? It's just come naturally to you. Maybe it's a space you create. Maybe it's a love that you give or a gift that you have or whatever it is. Is there something that has just always been true for you that has been of benefit or gift that you may feel called into being? And maybe if that's not resonating so much, maybe think about if there's any stories that you imbibed as a child that you've essentially grown into now. So I invite you now, please, to do so. And for the folks at home, I invite you to type into the chat anything that's coming up for you along these lines and these topics, and I'll read them into the sanctuary here in just a few moments. So please, I invite you to go meet someone new if you're feeling open to that. And I'll ring the bell to bring us back together. Okay, switch, folks. All right, folks. Well, there'll be more opportunity to share. Bringing you back. Come on, kiddos. Bringing you back. Beautiful. So beautiful, folks. Let me share a couple from... Let me share a few that came in here through Zoom. So beautiful to see all this. From Catherine and Richard Hanway, to be a safe space where people can talk about painful things that happen to them, acknowledge their pain, and by doing so, help to remove shame around it. From Allie Jenkins, she writes, ever since I can remember, I've enjoyed making spaces welcoming and beautiful for others. My grandmothers and aunt taught me the value of this. Yes. From Margaret Miles, she wrote, I have sung since I could talk, and I've written songs for many years. I know that one of my callings is to uplift people with my songs. So lovely. Incredible. Now I'll give another kind of avenue of exploration here. This is a teaching that comes from Richard Rohr, although I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. And first, I'll just acknowledge that it has a little bit of a middle-class bent to it, but hopefully it'll be still resonant. So Richard talks a lot about this idea of the first half of life and the second half of life. It's a pretty familiar concept in many circles, but just briefly, the idea behind it is that the first half of life is sort of the part of your life that really starts as a teenager when you start to individuate, and it's kind of about your ego and building your structures and your identity. So when we kind of think about most of what our society is urging us toward doing, typically, it's generally first half of life stuff. So it's about, doing well in school if you can, and going and getting a degree and getting the job and finding a mate and starting a family and joining a spiritual community and kind of putting all of these structures and supports in place. That is what the first half of life is about. And as Richard teaches it, there's many folks who never really move past the first half of life. They think that that is the entire thing, just getting the next house, getting whatever it is. So he introduces the idea of the second half of life, which is the idea of, okay, you've built this container, you have all this support. What do you fill it with? Why? Why do all this? Why put all this stuff in place and so that you're ready to go to do what? To go out and serve, hopefully, is what he usually goes at. And, when I think about this for me, I'm still squarely in the first half of life. I don't have any illusions about that. It's just where I find myself in my life position. But when I think about the second half of life, I think about all these structures and supports. I think about me placing them because what I really want to do is that I want to be available for others. And as my container fills in, it allows me to move into a space where I can just be more present to others and what they're dealing with. Maybe perhaps I have done some healing because of my structure, whatever that is. So that's sort of how I see my second half of life. So I'll invite you all now here. Whether you're in your first half of life or second half of life or you have no clue, which is totally fine, what do you envision your second half of life being about? What's it all about? So I invite you now, please share with one another whatever is coming up for you around this idea of what is this second half of life about? And for the folks at home, please do put it in the chat and I'll read it here into the sanctuary.
You're still in the first half, right?
No.
Yes. Yes. Right?
And now it's like,
Yes. Yes. Well, so forgive me, what is work? You've been in AAA for some time? Yeah, you're one of those rare people. I had two jobs. The first one out of school was 2.5 years. The next one was 30 months. Like you, at the second part, you're in the same company, but you're wrong.
Okay, switch.
All those things keep changing. So it's not the same job. And yeah, you stayed in one company for a long time. But
All right, kiddos, let's come on back. Come on back. So lovely to hear and feel the energy in the room. We didn't get anyone from the chat. Oh, never mind. Actually, I take that back. Let's see. From Lisa Cohen, we have serving people. Second half of life. From Kim Holscher, she writes, second half is better than the first. Wider perspectives, the ability to reflect and let go, the ability to nurture others. Yes, 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 yes. Victoria Holdridge says, I'm exploring my spiritual purpose on this earth. Yes, I think we all are. So the last, one more on this. I want to tell a story about this rock. This rock. This is a sacred object for me. It's something I carry around with me. So the story of this rock is that I was driving up to Redding, California to be with some of the Illumin brothers. And we were going up there to do some work on some land. Never been to that area of Northern California, never been to Redding before. And as I was driving up, I was listening to a book on tape of Richard Rohr, and he started discussing the topic of original sin in Christianity, which is a very difficult topic, right? It's, sort of the original sin is basically the idea that we're all sinners at our core, which is not very popular in UU circles, of course. It's not very popular with Richard Rohr either. So, being Richard, he's got some groovy take on all of it, and what he was saying was basically that there is a blanket of wounds. There's a blanket of wounds that lays over our entire culture and population. These are historical wounds, cultural wounds, familial wounds. There's so many to choose from. And that his idea of original sin isn't that, we're all so terrible. His idea is that, there's this blanket of wounds that just sits over our society and is constantly pushing on us in so many ways. And that wounding causes trauma and causes sinful behavior, for lack of a better word. Painful, hurtful behavior as we react to those wounds that are not healed, that have not been healed yet. And as I was listening to this, it just felt like something clicked for me. Like, oh, wow, maybe this is it for me. Obviously, I will never lift this blanket of wounds, but perhaps what is mine to do, and this was early in my ministerial path, what is mine to do is to just lift that blanket just the tiniest little bit, whatever I can. Right? From wherever my station is, if I could just lift it just like a tiny little bit, just to give some breathing room. That's it. Maybe that's really what I'm here to do. I felt that really deep in my soul. And I had a couple more hours of driving. Finally arrived in Redding, got to my motel, and I went out for a walk that night. And I'd been thinking about this a lot. And again, never been to this place, don't know where I'm going, literally just chose a random route to walk outside. And I get to this really, really big intersection, really big. There's not a lot of people around, but it's a huge intersection. And as I'm walking, I'm going to cross the street, and I notice there's this object that's just sitting in the sidewalk, sitting on the sidewalk. And it's sort of located kind of on like the concrete lip of the sidewalk. You know how there's usually that little indentation, and so the way it was sort of in that indentation, but this rock was placed just perfectly in the middle of that indentation, right in my path. And, I almost stepped right over it, but I looked down and it kind of glistened a little yellow gold to me. And so I picked it up, and the minute I picked it up, I could feel a power from it. I could feel a real power. I have never been one to feel power from stones or crystals or anything like that. This is all totally new to me. I had no idea. But when I looked around, there were no other rocks. There were no rocks anywhere. It was literally like this stone had been just placed in front of my path for me to find it. And I have had a spiritual connection with it ever since. And so for me, I took this finding of this rock, its placement, as a sign. Again, I come from sort of an atheist, secular background. I'm not one to think of superstitious ways like this, but it was undeniable. Where did this come from? And if you maybe can't see it great from here, but the stone is basically in the shape of a snake head. And sort of traditional symbology for snakes is that they are a symbol of healing and renewal. And I took that as a sign. So I open it up to here. Again, when we're thinking about call, have you ever just received a sign? Has something happened to you that you just can't explain, but it got to you, and it made you feel like you were in the right place, or feeling that purpose, or feeling anything, really? What was that sign? Have you ever felt that before? Maybe it was a dream or a vision or a transcendent experience in nature. It doesn't have to be finding a rock. So, I leave you all to it. Please share your stories. Have you ever received a sign that really hit you in your soul? Something you can't explain. Okay, switch. So beautiful to receive all of that. Kim Holscher wrote, I've had strangers tell me my karma, yes, and messages from people who have passed. To which Catherine and Richard Hanway responded, wow. She wrote, I became and remained a Waldorf teacher because of the signs. From Jan Seagrave, she wrote, okay, maybe 5 years ago, after recovering from a medical issue, I started on my walk, as usual, and saw the flowers in my neighbor's garden just look up at me and shine in the sun and sort of twinkle. I wasn't on any meds. Exclamation point, exclamation point. Other things that morning looked especially beautiful and unique. So just to kind of close up here, our theme for this month is renewing faith. Renewing faith. And for me, call is ultimately about faith. It's really about faith. We can't really have proof of these things. It's something that we just end up believing. And, for me, this is actually a really important understanding. Again, as I was saying, I come from a sort of atheist, secular background. And a word like faith to me used to be a bit of a head scratcher. I would think of it as being something akin to believing in something that I'm not really sure is real, which doesn't sound very romantic, does it? But that's not really what it's about, even though that is part of it, of course. To me, this idea of, what is mine to do, and when that gets firmly placed, it can be a true sort of faith calling. No one can really kind of take that away from you. And as those who know who have pursued their call, there are times when the evidence isn't exactly stacking up that this is working out well. It can happen, right? So it really does become an aspect of faith. Just like the grace statements. You are loved. You are enough. Everything is going to be okay. You belong. And you are called. I just want to end too with one more idea, if all of this feels maybe a little bit esoteric or conceptual or abstract, which is that I think an amazing place to see one's call in action is in community. It's in community. And I see it here in this community constantly. Y'all show up for one another with your gifts, and you contribute your gifts in. You do what is yours to do. Here in this community, you have found a place in that. So again, call can be about placement. And so maybe think about that too. Where have I been placed? And what can I do in that placement? What is mine to do there? And again, it's just been one of my really deep joys of being an intern minister here at UU Marin, to see those gifts on display and see the recognition and gratitude that those gifts are met with. It's beautiful. Thank you.